Hello, Rew Hanks.
Hello, Richard. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Delighted to see you. Your exhibition, well, actually, we're going to talk about two exhibitions, but your solo exhibition is a survey exhibition, first of all, at Nicholas Thompson Gallery in Melbourne. That exhibition is Captain's Choice, a survey 2001 to 2019. But you're also a very significant part of a group exhibition at Michael Reed Gallery in Sydney called Navigating Cook. So two exhibitions to talk about, but just before we do, a reminder to the viewer that the idea with these interviews is to go to the website of the gallery or galleries and actually go to the exhibition page, find the images, have a look at them, and if possible, be looking at them while we have our conversation and you listen to the interview. That'll be the best value. So yes, very warm welcome to you, Rew. And before we start talking about those exhibitions, actually, I must say, big congratulations. I mean, what an 18 months of prize winning it has been for you. I think recently it was the Megalo International Print Prize, but then you've also had three major national prizes recently: the Lerida Estate Acquisitive Prize, the Fremantle Print Award, the Burney Print Prize. How have you caught your breath?
It's been amazing, Richard. Look, I've been lucky. I have won quite a few prizes previously, but to win all those national prizes and obviously Megalo was fantastic. It's very overwhelming. It's look, it's financially it's nice because you can pay off bills and framing bills and all those sorts of things. But it's also to get those accolades from nationally have been fantastic. So now I can retire.
Oh no, don't do that. Not with the work you're producing.
Only joking.
But, you know, I mean, I think to be serious, it's wonderful to see such a consistency of acclaim and a recognition across the nation and indeed internationally of the exceptional quality of work that you produce. So, you know, really very warm congratulations for that.
Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful 2 years.
Now, turning to these exhibitions and of course, importantly, your solo survey at Nicholas Thompson Gallery, both of these exhibitions very much look at a kind of a reassessment, sometimes with a very wry sense of humour, but a reassessment of colonialism, and particularly perspectives on Cook. Of course, you know, here in Australia, we're noting, if not celebrating, the significant recent anniversary of the landing. But, you know, what is your take, your motivation on engaging with that whole reassessment of colonialism?
Look, it's been a huge fascination for about 20 years. I guess I like to reinterpret history. I've seek out historical prints, old wood engravings or paintings, and I guess I make up a slightly contemporary narrative. I use a lot of satire, so I want to entertain people. I don't necessarily want to get on the soapbox and say this is how it is and that sort of thing. I like to, and often I will put in two variations of what may have happened. So I'm leaving it up to the viewer to decide. I did a Captain Cook series that had the cane toad. So it was the idea of who's invading what. And so it's, yeah, I have a lot of fun with old imagery and new imagery. And sometimes there's very incongruous things in there to entertain myself. So I do have a bit of fun because they do take such a long time to cut. I have to keep entertaining myself as well.
Well, entertaining and entertainment is certainly a big part of these images, but you did mention satire, and there's obviously some quite serious and occasionally quite concerned satire in there. Let's go to a particular work which really incorporates all of those things, and I think this work is in both the exhibitions that we've referred to, and that is the one with the title "Stop, There's No Need to Shoot the Natives." Now, it's based obviously on quite an iconic painting of Cook's arrival by Emmanuel Phillips Fox many years ago, but it also has reference to another painting by Indigenous artist Daniel Boyd, and it's got stacks of other things in it as well. Just give us a run through of some of what's going on in that painting.
I have had fun because I enjoy the research. So I have Philip Fox actually in the artwork as well. I've put in Daniel Boyd and some of his references, because when he did his beautiful piece, he included his flatmates. So I put all those sorts of things in. There's references to La Perouse vanishing and never being seen again. So he's windsurfing in the distance. There's lots of conservation things about the foxes and rabbits, and there's a beautiful treasure chest of cane toads. There's a reference to Daniel Boyd's a pirate. I've changed the idea that the original used to have two black boys, and yeah, and I guess I'm sort of saying as well that Captain Cook was a humanitarian for his day, but obviously seen historically, it may have been more brutal than. So I'm not really. I'm sure there is the thing about Europeans invading. There's the animals that they're brought to Australia. So there's that serious thing. There's a reference to national parks, and that people could shoot the natives in the national parks or introduced species. So there is a lot in there.
I want to take you, actually, if I can, to, in fact, the two animals that the crew members, the Cook's crew members, are pointing their guns at, and they are two kangaroos. That's presumably what the partly humorous title refers to, don't shoot the natives. They're pointing the guns at the kangaroos, but each of those kangaroos is based on a different image from a different historic artist.
They are indeed. I think they're based on George Stubbs, and obviously the original had two Indigenous Aboriginals, and I've changed that to shooting the natives. Yeah, so.
Yeah, just such a depth of detail is what I was really trying to recognise in those works. You see them, they are immediately visually beautiful and engaging, but the depth, once you start going mining literally into the material there, is just endlessly giving.
And that's why often when I do show the work, the gallerists will say, well, can we have an artist statement? Because they can't remember exactly everything. And people always ask, so I don't pretend to write particularly well. So I often get other people to write bits and pieces about the work and what have you.
Actually, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, and it's one of the other reasons that it's really important to try to go to the gallery websites in conjunction with an interview like this, because on the Nicholas Thompson Gallery website for your exhibition, there are quite detailed explanations beside each work for what's going on, which is great to be able to see. And I think the Michael Reed exhibition has a very considered essay by art critic John MacDonald, which puts all of the works and the contributions into context as well. So really important to try and absorb those.
It's really timely that the two exhibitions are on it, and I think with a show at Nicholas, I think we added one or two more Captain Cook works in it. But it was great to have someone like Lisa Bunbury create the show, curate the show, or select, or what have you. So it was sort of out of my hands. So she obviously concentrated on the colonial theme throughout.
Well, Elisa Bunbury, the curator of this survey show, Captain's Choice, is a curator at the Ian Potter Museum of Art in Melbourne, and has a very illustrious background with other institutions. Do you have a sense of what it was that she was looking for in the works that she chose from those years between 2001 and 2019?
Look, we sent off a full range of images, and she has gone in for that the early historical works that pay homage to John Glover, and right up to the more contemporary ones, which with Napoleon and Josephine. So there's still got a very Australian, a lot of people say, oh, you do all that Australian work. And you forget that it is, although the physicality of actually producing it is based on traditional English wood engravings, but the content is very Australian. So, and I love that idea that they look like old work, but they've still got a very contemporary theme.
Well, let's go to those two works that you mentioned with, because one wouldn't necessarily expect to find Napoleon and Josephine in an Australian context. Those two works are Napoleon in Exile and Josephine's Ark. Well, tell us about both of them.
Well, I guess with Josephine's Ark, it's about Nicolas Boudon, who Napoleon funded when they were coming out to Australia. There was a lot of rivalry between Australians, or the British and the French. Josephine was obsessed with Australia, so they actually had a boat out of I think there was 5 or 6 ships that came out, and one of them was called Josephine's Ark, and they collected 400 different species. There was wattle, there was swans, there were kangaroos, emus, of which they all took back to Paris, and she created this beautiful parkland that was a menagerie of Australian animals. She had wattle that she grew, so she had that in her hair, and she had it all through the house. Unfortunately, the kangaroos and the emus didn't survive particularly well, but the black swan, she introduced that to Europe, and they thought it was sort of the devil bird, but it was. But the actual print is sort of based on the Greek myth about Leda and the swan. So there's a lot of historical references there and Australian references. And it's based on a Michelangelo, or several artists have done similar interpretations of that myth. So, and then Napoleon in Exile, he was in exile a few times, but he kept escaping. So they put him on St. Helena, and I've got him on a little island off Western Australia, just as a nice little fun thing. And he has, coffee pots and all sorts of things. And there's the emu. the emu. It's basically that small man syndrome. So Napoleon's got his chest all fluffed up. The emu has, the quokka has. There's a little pug in the corner. So there's all these other references. So they look very incongruous, but they do actually link.
And interestingly, you mentioned the emu, because wasn't there at that time, around the time that you're imaginatively creating this exile, wasn't there actually a more dwarf species of emu that existed on some of those islands, which is now extinct?
That is correct. I think the story goes that they actually collected them just off South Australia, and I think they took 12 of them back, and that was the end of them. When they perished and died out, that was the end of the species. So I love it because it does link to that small man syndrome.
A lovely reference.
Although I did the research, and apparently Napoleon was average height. But it was actually, some of the English have portrayed him as this small man as a way of saying, hey, we can conquer Napoleon.
Early propaganda.
That's it. There's always propaganda, and then you create your own.
Now, you mentioned just a little while ago, the whole woodcutting approach. And can you give us a little bit? Let's go into physically what you do. You produce these extraordinary visual results, but for people who may not be familiar with the process, it's very exacting. Tell us what it involves.
Look, I will, when I did my master's, I don't know how many years ago, and I learned to research. So I love the research side of it. I can be triggered by any podcast or something on the radio or newspaper or whatever on the internet, and I will say, okay, there's an idea there. I will start researching it. So I might only use 10% of what I've researched. And then I will look, as I teach full time, I don't have a lot of time to do an elaborate drawing. So I use photographs, I use books, I print madly out of the internet. And then something does evolve. Sometimes it will change. I will draw it up. Occasionally I trace something. I'm dreadful for putting things back to front in the wrong way, because you have to cut it back to front so it prints the right way, all those sorts of things. So I do all those sorts of things. And my big thing is that my wife will come in and say, enough, because I will keep adding and adding, because the more I'll start cutting, and then I'll look at, I can add that, and that's that links with that. And so I do have to pare it down slightly. But I often cut at 4:30 in the morning and all those dreadful things. And then I will cut, and always start cutting the main figure's face and build that up. And then if it's late at night, I will cut the clouds, or I have the joke of cutting the grass at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, but during the day, because as you get a bit older, your eyes aren't as good. So it's better if during the day you cut the really important things, and then it builds up from there. But you can get devoured by the process, and so you can overcut. So you have to.
So tell us about this actual cutting process physically. What is it actually that you're cutting, and what sort of tools and approaches and physical steps are involved?
Sure. Well, the lino, you can buy it as long as you like. I sand it back so it's like glass, and that makes it easier to cut, but it's also easier to print because it's slightly grainy. And then the process of cutting, often I will use a permanent marker to black out something, so it's easy to cut if something's black. And then you get a variety of tools, and I have Japanese tools, I have Swiss tools, American tools. So I have a full range of them, which I should sharpen more than I do, because you can see it tearing and all that sort of thing. And
Not
so,
very
yeah,
often,
you have to get the angle right and all that sort of thing. And people always ask, what happens if you make a mistake? And I'm going, well, I cut so finely you don't see them, or if you make you slip a bit and it's turned into a branch or something like that. But it is a very slow process. But you sort of got to get into the zone.
And these are often quite large works. You're not doing tiny detailed works, you're doing very substantial detailed work.
Well, the odd thing is I'm sort of cutting a bit similar to a woodcut artist, and they often do very small, but I'm doing it sort of on a large scale. And then after I'm finished cutting them, I ink them up with a roller and put them through the etching press. So the size, I choose that size because after cutting something for 3 months, you get a bit sick of it. But that size will fit the press. I can handle the paper, all those sorts of things. So that's sort of why the size.
Well, it's a great insight into the process, so thank you. Let's go back to one of the works in the exhibitions again now, which is one you touched on a little earlier when you mentioned cane toads. This is the work Banks, Which One Is Mine? And that apparently is what Cook is as a golfer asking his caddy, Banks, as he decides which cane toad to whack. I think tell us more, because there's a lot going on in this particular work.
Well, that happened from someone in Queensland. I've known quite a lot of people in Queensland, lovely people, and someone was saying, they relayed this story of a relative or friend used to go to a Catholic girls' school, and they'd have hockey practice, and then after hockey practice, the amenity block would be full of cane toads. So they'd let the girls go in there and sort out the cane toads with their hockey sticks. So it's a good story. So this was, 30 odd years ago. But so I thought, maybe, whacking cane toads, which I don't really approve of, but I thought I can have a bit of fun. And then so in the print, it's got St. Andrews. And so I researched the start of people didn't get trophies, they got sashes, and that's why Cook's got this belt. They're supposedly winning the Australian Championships. I researched the original golf clubs. I researched the original golf balls and how the first time they grew the rubber and all that sort of thing. I've got some laconic kangaroos, you know, because they're always the tourist thing. So there's all those, the clouds, the nice sort of relaxed sort of clouds of Captain Cook sort of looking into the distance, exploring. And then we've got Banks, who was slightly uptight, and he often funded some of them. So the clouds above him are sort of tense and stressed, and apparently liked a drop of whatever. So in his pocket, he's got a nice bottle of something to drink. So there's, it's quite playful, but so, and the role of Banks being the sort of the minor party, but still financing. So there's all those slight things there.
There is so much to discover in the stories of these works. I want to go to one final work before we come to your self-portraits, which we'll wrap up on. But that final work is Kreft's Chair. I have to say it's always been one of my favourite works for many years. But Kreft's Chair, there is such a fantastic story behind this huge armchair.
Look, there is that won a big prize in Japan, first Westerner to win this huge prize in Japan, which is fantastic. And they loved it because it was a portrait of somebody, and that person wasn't really apparent. So they liked that idea. There was a little portrait of Kreft. Gerard Kreft was the director of the Australian Museum. He corresponded with Darwin, and there's a portrait of Darwin in there as well. William Maclay got a bit antsy and sort of said, well, you know, what's going, evolutionists, we don't agree with this. So it was at a time in Australia where, yeah, I guess things haven't progressed all that much. Kreft discovered the lungfish. The story goes with that he was having a meal, and he went out to the kitchen and they said, we're serving salmon. And he went, no, your salmon has lungs. So that's the story on that one. And
I gather also famously, but slightly infamously, Kreft actually arranged in the basement of the Australian Museum, for the pleasure of the visiting Duke of Edinburgh, a fight between a cobra and a mongoose.
And that is correct. Yes, I have checked that, and that's why I've got the mongoose. And so he was slightly eccentric, which seemed to worry a few people, but he was a phenomenally, he wrote the first book on Australian mammals and snakes, and so he was, but he obviously fell out with people, and they wanted to take the directorship away from him. So they got two prize fighters in, and he barricaded himself into his office, and that's why there's a boxing glove there. And they broke down the door, picked him up in that chair, and ran out onto College Street and threw him into the gutter. He obviously was destitute. He contacted Henry Parkes, and Henry Parkes said, sorry, I can't do anything for you. And I think he's buried in Newtown somewhere. So it was a phenomenal story. And it was a great acknowledgement of this eccentric but very clever individual, and so it's actually he's remembered through a lot of these things, and that started just by listening to a director of the museum, and I just went, there's a nice story in here.
And Kreft's chair is still in the Australian Museum, I think.
I did get into trouble because I said in one of my other statements that it was waiting for the next director. It's outside their office waiting for.
Kim McKay does a very fine job, and so
he does. Not with actually before her, but it was before Kim. Trying to get me into trouble, but
no, definitely not. Anyway, wonderful work. But this is the trouble. There are so many stories and so much to talk about in your works, in your images. People should just become entirely lost in them as they.
Although sometimes I really like people, if I'm in the gallery, that they come in and they look at a work and I don't say anything to them, and they don't read the artist statement, and they consume what's there, and then they come and try and find out, because I prefer people to try and discover things themselves.
Look, great stories. Let's wrap up because it's been fantastic to have a good long chat. But let's wrap up with your self-portraits. And in fact, one of them is on the wall, on your studio wall behind you there. But tell us about your self-portraits.
If you want to sell prints, don't do a self-portrait. However, the most recent one, the one that's behind me, and that's a homage to Hogarth, who did a self-portrait, and it's called The Painter and Trump, I think his dog. And it's a thing, because I've always had pugs for 25 years. And with this one, I'm sending myself up. I'm fat, I'm middle-aged. The pug is with me is fat, whereas in William Hogarth, the pug is very thin, and I'm having a go at all the painters winning these big art prizes and printmakers being forgotten. So there's got a palette there, and it's got a roller and ink on it, so it's called The Beauty of Ink. So I'm saying, hey, printmakers aren't too bad as well. They might be fat and middle-aged. So I'm just having a bit of fun. Whereas the other self-portrait, that was done probably 12 years earlier, and that was linked with, it was completely choreographed. I'd seen a lot of photos of the Tasmanian tiger with men with their big guns standing over these dead tigers and all that sort of thing. So I was just saying that I've got this little cutting tool in my hand, and I'm going, this is how I'm going to explore the history of the Tasmanian tiger. And I made the hat with artificial fur. I think I borrowed my wife's jacket, and we went underneath the tree fur out the back. And she took some photos, and she's going, oh, that one you make looks fat and sort of what have you. And I said, no, this is the one I want, and I've got a double chin, and, you know, you can't take yourself too seriously. But the funny thing is, before we go, with the first one, with the pug, I sold about 5 of them. And Janet, my wife, said, oh my God, you know, why are people buying you? You know, why would they want? And I found out they're all obsessed with pugs. So they're actually buying the print for the pug, not for me.
It was the Pug Appreciation Society buyout.
So you can't be too precious.
What a fantastic note to conclude on. Look, Rew Hanks, it's been a complete delight to have a chat. Thank you so much, and all the best with both the exhibitions in which you're involved with. Thanks for sharing your exhibitions with us.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's been a pleasure.